Today is Susan Golden. She is a retired high school STEM teacher who teaches globally on climate change and other environmental issues such as sustainability, pollution, and water scarcity. She develops curricula and learning activities on these topics and facilitates presentations and workshops to schools and community groups around the world. She will be doing an interactive exercise with us today, talking about issues around global warming. Susan?
Thank you. I'm going to take this off. Actually, I'm mic'd. I don't need that. Thank you. 1 second. Hi, everyone. So let me just get ready here 1 second. I need my glasses. I just gotten old. Okay. So we'll put this on for 2 seconds. So real fast about me, Pablo, right? Paulo, sorry, said, I'm a retired high school science and math teacher. And it just when I began teaching environmental sciences, I realized how little most people know about the interaction between society and nature. And it became my passion to teach people and raise their awareness of how our communities actually interact. Where does our waste go? Where do our resources come from? How much do we use of each, etc.? And in doing so, of course, I got a real I also looked at climate change and global warming, and of course that's a very existential and alarming situation. It's the biggest problem that we face, this entire generation of humans. 7.8 billion people share this planet that we call home, and there is no other place. So what are we going to do about it? And definitely the planet is rising, the temperature is rising. We are already over 1 degree Celsius in the last 100 and some odd years. And so we need to do something about it because we're already seeing the impacts of climate change and global warming. But there are other things about modern society that are changing the way we live too, and that has to do with land use, water use, etc. And these are all combining to exacerbate some of the environmental issues that we're seeing today. And thus, that's what I speak on. I speak to groups like you guys, schools, people of faith, etc. So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much. And this is I just looked it up. This is my 4th time speaking here. And so thank you. It's been a while, though, because of COVID, I'm sure. So and in doing that, I want to pause a moment. And I want to say, I want to bring my attention to Janet Glass, whom I know most of you, if not all of you, remember, passed away earlier this year. She was also a friend of mine. We went out to see the wind turbines at Block Island. That's a picture when we were out there together. And Janet actually gave me my very first break. I had just been trained by the Al Gore Group Climate Reality Project, and she had that climate rally in Hackensack, and she asked me to speak. And that was my very first public speaking engagement. Since then, I've spoken over 300 times. I've reached over 3,400 people in my person-to-person or via Zoom. And so I want to thank Janet, who was truly an inspiration and a role model for me, too. And she'll be sadly missed, I'm sure, here as well. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So, but today, what we're going to do today, this is an interactive session. I am not going to speak for 45 minutes, you know. First of all, do you know that this is a great line? Research shows that showing people research will not change their minds. And that is true, because if that were not the case, then we wouldn't be in this quagmire we're in, because the research has been there since the 1970s that we are changing the surface of the planet, the whole biosphere, the cryosphere. We are just our modern society, and the number of people that are here are making a real impact, which is why also scientists are calling this the Anthropocene, which is anthro because man is having such an impact. So what I'd like to do, what we're going to do for the rest of this session, I'm going to need your help. We're going to look at this. This is, when I learned about this tool, I had to get trained in it. I spent 40 hours. I have been using this tool for 2 years to raise awareness and show you how we have the solutions to climate change right now and global warming. And to give you an idea of which ones are more impactful than others. And so today we're going to be using this simulator called En-ROADS, and this is a workshop. As a matter of fact, to make sure I have enough time, my husband Steve is going to be timing us here to make sure that in 30 minutes, I want to make sure we have time for a debrief. So this simulator was designed by MIT Sloan School and Climate Interactive using a Ventana system. It is calibrated to meet the latest research models that are out there from both business and government and non-government like the United Nations. And they update it every month. So the latest research always goes into it and they don't stop. So we're going to be working with this simulator today. So can you all see it? Good. I'm going to switch. And can you see my cursor? Good. So this is the En-ROADS simulator. It's free. It's online. You just have to Google En-ROADS, see it there, EN-ROADS, and you will get to this simulator here. We use it in schools. They use it. This was developed by economists. I don't know if you know, but Sloan School is the business school of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. And this was developed to show to legislators and decision makers, and it has been to people around the world. It's an international following. As a matter of fact, we have people on here from Germany and Portugal, and I've worked with people in Africa, Iran, and Europe, etc. So people are using this. It's to raise, again, awareness to see if we can fix this climate challenge that we have. So what we're going to do today is we're going to, let me give you a quick tour. This has many graphs. On the screen are 2 graphs. This is the global sources of primary energy. With pink being bioenergy. You probably can't see it on the screen, but there's a tiny sliver of nuclear, which is light blue. Green is the amount of renewable resources. Blue is natural gas or methane. Red is oil, which we think of gasoline, but it's actually oil. Generally, that's what we use for our transportation. And the brown is coal. So that's one of the main graphs that we're going to look, and this is how much energy we use. This is a global model, by the way. So as we work with it, this is what if the whole world does these actions, okay? So if you look, there's real data. You can see it popping up there, and to 2020, it's based on historical data, so it matches what we have actually used up till there, and then it goes on in predictions. It's a systems dynamic model. There's over 14,000 equations, nonlinear differential equations that drive this. And like I said, it's calibrated to scientific models, but this we can move and we get instant reactions, as you'll see. The other initial graph that we're going to look at is greenhouse gas net emissions, and you can see that we have been emitting more and more greenhouse gases, and that the emissions, unfortunately, continues to rise. If anyone here familiar with Project Drawdown? Okay, good, actually. Project Drawdown, the point that they use, and I'll be using that term, drawdown is the point at which we're going to stop emitting greenhouse gases, and we are going to draw down that curve. Okay, yes?
So when you say we're emitting more greenhouse gases, I just want to clarify one thing. Is that the function of less trees and are using fossil fuels, or is it just more fossil fuels? So what's that?
Good question. So I don't know if you on Zoom can hear, so I'm just going to repeat the questions. Hopefully I'll remember. This gentleman asked if the greenhouse gas emissions is a net or a gross in a way, right? Is it the emissions that we're emitting and not being pulled in from the atmosphere? And yes, this is just the emissions that human society is sending. So this is kind of the gross. This is not what's being taken in. This is just showing that our emissions are continuing, unfortunately, to go up. We had a decrease there. The year of the pandemic, 2020, was a slight decrease because of the shutdown. And one of the coolest things about that shutdown, you know, COVID had a whole bunch of silver linings, and one of them was that shutdown. Do you realize that in 8 weeks of shutdown, the air around the world got cleaner? It only took 8 weeks for us to see noticeable differences in our actions created another reaction. Now, some things are going to happen and can change that quickly, but there are other things that are actually going to take hundreds of years to change, such as sea level rise. Sea level rise is already on a trajectory, and no matter what we do today, if we stopped all greenhouse gases, flip that switch, it's still going to rise for quite a while and quite a bit. So that's another thing that you won't see, but we can certainly see the air cleaning up and all. So that was a good question, thank you. And we'll be getting into more, we're going to be looking at that in a minute. But you can see here that the greenhouse gas net emissions are going to rise. And so in general, most scientists, we hate calling this a prediction, and I'm going to keep it in Celsius, by the way, or centigrade, yeah, Celsius. Most predictions see that if we keep going the way we've been going, that we're going to have a rise of temperature by 2100, that it's going to be 3.6 degrees warmer than it is today, or than it was at the beginning of 2020. And so that's actually better than it used to be. So that's an increase of 6.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 6.4 degrees Fahrenheit. We're already in New Jersey over 3 degrees warmer than it was 100 years ago, which is why the ponds don't freeze. And some of you, most of you are as old as I am. And when I was a young lady, a little girl actually, I ice skated on the ponds. I grew up in Tenafly, and I ice skated on the ponds in Tenafly. And my children, to them, it's just a story. No, ponds just don't freeze anymore, and that's because it's warmer. The thermometers in Central Park, they've been measuring it. They've seen there are 22 fewer days of below freezing than there used to be in 1900. So we've got the empiric data. Like I said, telling you about research doesn't change minds. So we've got this, and we're going to try to look, our job in the next 20 minutes or so, 25, is we're going to take global actions, and we're going to try to bring that temperature to meet the Paris Accord. So in 2015, one of the unprecedented, well, actually it was precedented, but one of the things that happened in 2015, which was really cool, is that the world got together and they recognized the need that we have to stop global warming before these catastrophic things will happen to us. And they will if we don't stop it. And so the United Nations, the International Panel for Climate Change, and the world, all the members, voted that the goal is to keep the temperature below 2 degrees Celsius and possibly even at 1.5 degrees. So you can see here we're on track for 3.6 if I go on up there. And what we want to do is get this blue line, although I'm not going to keep it on the screen. We want that blue line to go somewhere between those two dotted lines, or if not lower. So I'm going to ask you, what is an action that either you see being taken now or you'd like to see? We can take actions in terms of energy supply, and that's in the fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear. We can, people always ask, what if we come up with something new like nuclear fusion? Well, that's a zero carbon. It's not a fossil fuel, so it doesn't emit carbon dioxide. So what if we have a breakthrough? We could put a carbon tax on all fossil, anything that emits carbon in any aspect. We can work with transportation. We can talk about buildings and industry. We can even look at growth. Both population and economic, as well as land and industry emissions, including deforestation and methane and other gases, carbon removal from afforestation, and different technological removal techniques. Yes, sir?
So let's assume.
You can use a mic.
Thank you. Let's assume that all transportation was via electric power.
Excellent.
Does this application take into account how the electric power is produced in order to charge the batteries?
Well, it can and it does. Well, let's do that. That's a great thing. Thank you, sir. So let's take a look. Let's electrify our transportation, and let's electrify all of it. You saw California just had passed the law that they're going to stop selling fossil fuel cars. by 2035. Most of Europe has already made that pledge. I just read, did you know that in Norway, over 85% of the cars now that are being sold are electric? We're only 5% here. We're a little behind the curve, but yeah. So what do you think's going to happen if I electrify, one second, if I electrify all the cars, what do you think's going to happen to this?
Well, I'm concerned that the electricity to electrify the cars will be produced in a way that increases emissions.
That's right. And we have to be concerned with that. And this gentleman is concerned that if we produce that electricity with fossil fuels, that it's going to make things worse. And so I am going to electrify all our transportation. And you see that it only dropped down the temperature by 2 degrees. And yet, let's take a look at those greenhouse gas emissions and what it did with it. So it actually brought it down a little bit also because we have reduced, let's replay this and take a look at this. What we've done, despite the fact that it looks like we're still making, let's take a look at that. We've reduced our oil use. Can you see that? We've really shrunk it. I'm going to replay it again. I want you to see that again. So while we've actually lowered our greenhouse gas emissions, and we're still powering this with coal. So our coal use has gone up a little, our natural gas use has gone up a little, but so has our renewable resources. So we're actually, even though, and by the way, an electric car is 20% more efficient than a gas-powered car. So even if we used coal to create that electricity, we still only need 80% as much as if we were going to get the gas. Yeah.
So is this assuming same amount of car use versus mass transit?
Well, no. This is actually, that's a great question. And I don't think so. I think this is just electrifying the vehicles. And anytime you want to look, there's more information. And this is new electric cars, buses, trains. So we're not really saying that we're getting more efficient, but we've taken the entire fleet and we're making it. We can make, did you notice, we can make it more efficient. And by efficiency, we're removing cars off the road. So we've done it. That in and of itself, though, is not a high leverage thing, right? It only lowers the temperature 0.2 of a degree. This gentleman has his hand up again. I'm going to just.
I want to ask you about the efficiency thing. So given a particular source like coal or oil, let's say oil. So if we use oil for a combustion engine, right, and it's just directly, and you're saying if we use it to generate electricity for an electric motor, that the same amount of oil is going to give the car. It's going to be more efficient with an electric, if it's used to create electricity for an electric car. Even if the electric car isn't getting from, you're not charging it from solar or wind. That's what I want to know, is the oil that's being used, it's going to be used more efficiently through an electric model or through,
So I don't know if you can hear on Zoom, but this gentleman asked if the oil being used is used more efficiently through electric or combustion engines. And actually, sir, we're using less oil. So we are, by electrifying cars, we're saying that we are, this model at least is, I hate to use the word predicting, but predicting that we will use less oil. So oil is going to fit in that equation less.
Thank you. It will be helpful if people in the room will use the microphones because we can't really hear on Zoom.
Okay, yeah, let's get another person. I'll be happy to come back to this in a little bit. Ma'am?
What if the source of electrifying cars, what if the source of the energy was solar?
What if the source of the energy was solar?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be wonderful. Shall we subsidize renewables?
Absolutely.
So if we subsidize renewables, this is for in general, not only for cars, but and this is, they've bundled renewables. This is wind, solar, and hydro. And then again, we're still only dropped by itself. I'm just going to replace it. So what we see here is that the renewables, we really have an increase in the renewable use, a little less in both coal and natural gas. And we're still, it only dropped us, though, 1/10 of a point. So just that's subsidizing solar. So we still actually haven't gotten rid of those other sources yet.
what about the cost of deforestation and such to get the minerals to make the batteries?
Good question. So you're talking about, let me make sure I understand this. I'm not sure that En-ROADS actually models the exact thing that you're talking. You want to talk about the resources and the damage to the environment that we're doing in order to build the batteries for electric cars. So we don't model that directly. I can stop deforestation, but when they talk about reducing deforestation, we're talking about using deforestation for all uses. So would you like me to try that? Or when we talk about, I want to address that a minute. When people talk about the deforestation and the damage from mining for mineral resources, I want to point out that while lithium, and we're using generally lithium-ion technology today to power these batteries, first of all, there is a ton of research going on into the science of battery power. So lithium isn't the end-all, and people know that it's a relatively rare metal and that it's expensive to mine and to get. And so they're looking at, while we talk, they're looking at alternatives. They also recognize the fact that it takes, anyone here have an electric car? We have an electric car, and it can take between a couple hours and a day to charge it. So the charging scheme, people are aware that if we try to get an entire fleet of electric cars, we also need to model a service station model. We need to get electric refilling to be like gas refilling. By the way, hydrogen, if we use hydrogen to power our cars, we can. Hydrogen pressures, as fast as you power up a balloon or a tire, you could charge a hydrogen-powered car. There's a gentleman here in New Jersey who runs the Hydrogen House. He is an evangelist when it comes to hydrogen powers. So he has his whole house and his cars, and this year he's working on putting an RV on hydrogen power. So, and Mazda, Honda, and Toyota both sell hydrogen-powered cars, which are for sale in California. So I want you to not, when you talk about doing damage to get batteries, I would like you rather turn around and what happens with all those tires on all those cars? Billions of tires. Now what are we doing? We're spreading those rotten tires, and we're not even having fields for our schools anymore, which is a monocrop culture. We're actually taking it away and putting astroturf with tires ground down. So to be honest with you, I'm not worried about the deforestation or the mining for getting the battery technology compared to the amount of copper, the amount of tire waste that we have and other plastic waste. That's minimum, very minimum.
Hey, Susan?
Yes.
Would you mind taking a few questions from Zoom, or do you want to do that later?
No, go for it. Just shout it out.
Okay, Richard Askins.
Hi, Richard.
Richard.
Hello.
Unmute yourself.
Yes.
Hi.
I just want to really cut to the chase if they put all this this work in here. It's very impressive. I'm sure it doesn't model everything, but it obviously models an awful lot of things. I'm also an MIT grad in structures, so I don't know this stuff as well as I do. But what I would like to know is what does cause the greatest effect in lowering the temperature? I suspect it will be either, and I don't know if it's in this model, either if we ever really get fusion energy, and I don't know if that's modeled under nuclear, or a population growth. And is that true, or what's going on?
Great question. And according to this model, I don't know if both are going to be right.
I'm sure I understand.
Did you hear the question?
Yeah, zero.
Well, he wants a zero carbon. So if we do nuclear fusion, let's say we have a breakthrough. And you can see now that the orange appeared on the screen. And hopefully you can all see that. So that dropped to 3.2. If I go and pretend that it's a major breakthrough, I still only dropped me down to 3.1 degrees. But I want you to point out, I want to point out another thing. If we take action today, we're at 2022. I put my cursor there at 2022. Look at where that orange line shows up on that. It doesn't even show up and make it. Here's where it starts up here. at about 2040, and it doesn't really make a difference till 2050 or so. So this is another piece that this needs to show. While we need to know, this is why scientists are saying we must take action today, because whatever actions we take, and you're going to find that you can see the greenhouse gas net emissions also. If we take action in 2022, look at when they don't even start to come down till 2030 or so. So but you had a great question, and if you want to see
yes, now take it down to zero population growth or negative, which we haven't been talking about for the last 30 years, which I find that's not going to do it. No, man.
Well,
so what's going to do it?
The population growth, you'll notice what we do here, the model is based on real, what we think, some real predictions, and so they use the United Nations prediction that in this century we're either going to go the low end, they think the world will have a population of 9 billion and the high end of 11 billion. We're at 7.8 now. So we're still going to have 1 billion more people, and if we keep down with low population growth, I'll replay it again, you'll see that our energy needs go down in general. So what was your name again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
That's okay, Richard, it's fine.
If you want me to really jump to this and give you guys, you're impatient.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be happy to play around with it.
What the model says is one of the most effective things that we can do is put a price on carbon. And watch what happens. If I put a price on carbon, then that right away has reduced me to 2.3. I'm going to replay that. Watch what happens to both my natural gas, my oil, and especially my coal. It goes down to 0. The same with bioenergy, because bioenergy is actually burning. Bioenergy is you growing material plants and then you're burning them for energy and hopefully capturing the carbon as you're doing that. But you can see that that is what brings it down the fastest, and I have not made a specific thing. But you'll notice that we're still not at 2.3. And there are lots of impacts. I haven't even shown you the impacts. There are 95, by the way, if you ever want to play this, there are over 90 graphs in here. And I just want to quickly show you that if we, one second please, I see your hands up. I just want to point out that there's air pollution. If we stop, especially coal, and stop burning fossil fuels, I want to make sure that I get this in there. One of the co-benefits of solving climate change, many of the actions that we can take, and we haven't even taken that many yet, but many of the actions we can take have co-benefits. And if we stop burning coal and stop burning methane and stop burning gas, we will, and we saw it during the COVID shutdown, we will have cleaner air to breathe. And there are millions of people around the world every year that die due to respiratory problems. Since I've moved here, I've developed asthma. I've been here 12 years. I grew up here and then I moved away and I came back. So there's a whole bunch of co-benefits to this also. Is there somebody, I'd like to call on somebody else, sir. And then I'll go back to Zoom after this gentleman.
Is there somewhere a list of the corporations of the many different energy sources that would oppose an increase in the price of carbon?
I'm sure I don't have that. I don't have that list, but pretty much every fossil fuel company doesn't want that. So around the world, so there's the International Energy Association. You could probably just even, Wikipedia probably has a list of international fossil fuel companies. You know, even Biden, in order to get the Inflation Reduction Act, he had to do, he did pretty good for what he got, but he had to open up drilling, right, in the Arctic and offshore, just to allow to try to get this bill through. But then again, only one person right now is even asked for a lease. So we keep our fingers crossed. Yes. Oh, wait, actually, I want to take Zoom. Somebody on Zoom?
Yeah, Pam Berglund.
Thank you very much. I have two quick questions. The first question is, why did they stop testing emissions on our cars a few years ago? And is it a negative or a positive action? And the second question is, are we beyond the ability, has the door shut for us to prevent global warming?
Could you repeat the second half of that question? I'm not sure I understood what you said there.
Somebody said that there was a 10-year period where we could stop global warming if we took action to stop it. But now apparently the door has closed on stopping those global warming. Is that true?
No. That's why I'm here. The door has not closed. They say that if we can take action by 2030, 2035, there's still a chance that we can keep this temperature down to 1.5 degrees. But we do, look, we've done a lot with the carbon price, but there's still other areas that we can work on this to do it. We have not done it yet. We also, real fast, by not testing emissions from your cars, that's also inaccurate. Right here in New Jersey, they test emissions of cars. They just give you 5 years. Once the car is 5 years old, then you go in every other year. And I'm sure that they do more if it had to do with funding, but I'm sure it's funding. You know, everything is funding. Fewer people.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Yeah, so you mentioned one way to achieve this would be to raise the price of using fossil fuel-based products. How would that be done? Through taxation? That's one aspect of it. And if that were the case, can you somehow model in any anticipated political blowback that might have political blowback in even possibly armed conflict, which might result in lowering the population as well, but I'm not so sure that's how we want to do it.
Thank you. That's a good question. We are modeling the taxing by putting a price on carbon, and over 20 governments already around the world do have some sort of price on carbon already. We don't here in the United States. There are other ways that you can tax it. There are taxing emissions. We could just tax coal. We could just tax, we do, right? There is a tax on gasoline. Isn't that when Christie, before he left office, that's how the New Jersey gas prices all of a sudden went up, because they put a bigger tax on gas in this state. So people are taxing coal and oil and natural gas, and that is generally what we are suggesting, what this models to do. By putting a price on carbon itself, we can take care of all three of those in one legislative swoop. Does that help?
And what about the political blowback? Is that modeled into this? Or?
No, this is not modeling politics. So I can't talk. This is actions. We're doing global actions. Sorry. Yes?
Wondering more about how would the tax policy work? Because I spoke to somebody who suggested, I spoke to somebody who thought that, I'm not remember what he suggested.
It is on. He needs to hold it
all right.
closer.
So I'm just wondering about the policy, the more of the details in tax policy for carbon. Is it, would it be like a tax but for consumers buying products, or is it a corporate tax, or which is the most efficient? And, what are the differences in the different ways of taxing carbon? Whether it's...
Well, actually, that's a good question. What are the different ways of taxing carbon? And we're actually very short on time. I often do this, and I spend an hour. So we only have about 25 minutes to do this, and I want to make sure you guys end on time. So I don't have time to go into it. Clearly, if we put a tax even on manufacturers, it's going to be passed down to consumers, and that does bring bring up a great point. And I want to talk about some of the financial. So we can look at all different types of finances, but I want to talk about the cost of energy. If we put this carbon tax on that you see on the screen there, you'll notice that we have almost immediately a giant spike. As we transition away from coal, as these fossil fuel companies have to find alternatives, they will charge, and the cost of energy will spike up. And this brings me, as a matter of fact, I love saying it, and here is the best thing, to climate change is an ethical issue. What happens, how do poor people, if the cost of energy goes up, how are they going to heat their homes, put gas, hopefully put gas in the car. And this is a problem with also electrifying vehicles, because how do people that live in apartments or park their cars on the street, it's my husband, we go home, he comes home, he plugs it in the garage, and it's all fine and dandy. But my children who live in apartments, how are they going to be able to charge their electric vehicles? So that's another thing, and that's generally often poorer people, right? So it's the lower income communities that are going to face the biggest challenges. So even as we create solutions to this situation, we always have to take into account all the marginalized communities. So one of the suggestions is to, hold on, where is it? So one of the suggestions here, while this does not model distribution, it does model, you can see here is the revenue. So they are saying that we're predicting that in the next 10 years, we're going to be getting $6 or so billion in tax revenues from the price on carbon. That's global, remember. So the question is, what if we distribute that money to the poorer people? And I heard New York State actually was considering this. The 48% lowest communities in terms of income would get the distribution of the money that they collect. So this is one of the theories. Now, are we going to get certain people who are very selfish to agree to this? Because this is a redistribution of wealth to a degree. And yet this seems like a reasonable alternative if I can subsidize your heating bill while this cost is going up, especially if you're low income. So that's one solution. Yeah? One second. You know what? I got to take a Zoom. Is there anyone on Zoom that has something that they'd like us to see?
Yes, Eric.
Oh, hi.
This will be the last one. We can talk later. I'll be happy.
Great. Thank you. And by the way, what you just described, I know I think it's called the Citizens Climate Initiative. It's got it's got bipartisan support, and it does sort of apply the cost to high carbon users and give that as a tax credit to low carbon users. But my question was around the methane and other gases, because as we know, methane is 30 times more persistent, or has 30 times the impact of CO2 in terms of its climate effect and how long it lasts in our atmosphere. And I'm going to put this out here as a bit of a plug, if I may, because I'm happy to say that our program Ethical Eating for Healthy and Humane People and Planet, which is our plant-based foods demonstration, is going to be coming back in November. Yay. But that's, I think, something that I want to at least ask you about. If we were to, say, switch 1 or 2 meals per week and avoid meat or other meat industry-based products, what impact might that have?
Great question. Great. Thank you for bringing that up. Methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. We just don't emit as much of it as we do carbon dioxide. But yes, much of the methane that is emitted comes from either from mining operations, and it's leaked. You know, methane, natural gas in your house, they add a scent to it. But methane is invisible, and it doesn't have an odor. So it's emitted all over the place. When you drive by a landfill, any vegetation that is rotting is emitting methane. And so landfills emit methane naturally, if you call it naturally, as well as our agricultural waste, our ruminants, the livestock that chew their cud, cows and sheep, they burp out an incredible amount of methane, as well as use a lot of resources. Half the food grown in this country is grown to grow our meat. So if we reduce our meat consumption, we can reduce all the resources that we need as a society. So does this model it? Yes, I can remove this. Well, actually, I can go in and just reduce methane and other gases. This, by the way, you have noticed, I can go down to these detailed settings, and if I say that I want to remove it, let's just do it in terms of agriculture and waste emissions, and we're going to reduce that. We've almost got, that brings it down to close to 2 degrees. So, and that is eating a lot less meat. That's capturing or letting less food waste rot. By the way, you know, I used to think that hydroelectric was a great, clean method of energy, but it turns out that when we actually flood a reservoir, create a reservoir because of a dam, there's actually that reservoir for 20 years while the vegetation that we just flooded rots is actually emitting methane. So it's not as clean, and not to mention the problems with the water flows too. So hydroelectric, there is, if you haven't noticed, there is no perfect answer. We have to make best choices, right, that include everyone. So I'm going to stop here. We came close to 2 degrees. I want to pause, and I want to ask you, were there any surprises today? Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that this is so overdetermined by so many factors. So for instance, like take the methane thing, for instance. One could ask the question, if people ate less meat, we'd have a much healthier population. How would a healthier population affect consumption of products? Also, one more thing that I thought, there are certain products, like take spring water. So if products were taxed individually, based upon the amount of carbon, I think in terms of priorities, that would be different than taxing it at the source, like just a corporate profit. So if it was individual consumption, that would seem to be, it would create priorities of consumption. And I think that's, what do you think about that?
Well, that's a very interesting thing to do, and to legislate it would be really difficult, I think, to get these people to look at things with such a fine-tooth comb. It can be implemented, that would essentially be a sales tax or a use tax to consumers.
But targeted, so certain things that were silly.
I like it. Let's talk about that later. I want to focus. Anybody see any surprises, or how do you feel about today, too?
Yeah.
And I'll take one from Zoom,
To
too,
me,
after these two.
To me, it seems as though we need to approach this on so many different fronts, with so many different programs, each of which has to be legislated, that to me, it's actually fairly pessimistic. To me, it says, we're screwed. Tell us why we're not.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I personally feel that this can be done, and they don't have to be legislated. By the way, no one's legislated that you have to buy electric cars, and yet sales are up to 5% in this country right now without any, as a matter of fact, they keep making it harder, right? You can't even get a stupid rebate if they've sold 250, although Biden just removed that. But you know, if they sold 250,000 cars, the rebate on electric cars went away. That was something that the fossil fuel industry, but luckily that's gone away, but that wasn't legislated. This gentleman, and then a Zoom.
My surprise was also, I'm now so much more pessimistic, so if you want to address that, but my main question is, have you or do you plan to give this talk to people in the Jersey state legislature? Or the federal government?
If anyone, this has been given to many legislators around the country. They're keeping track at Climate Interactive. I personally have not had an audience with a New Jersey state legislator. If you can get me that audience, it's just, I focus on people generally. I'd love to work with also the Citizens Climate Lobby. I would be more than happy to use this tool with the legislators. Anyone on Zoom a little less pessimistic? All right, well, I'm gonna, let's take this.
Eric.
Well,
Just yell it and I'll repeat it.
I'll raise my hand. I mean, I do remain optimistic.
All right, 1 second, we have a Zoom question, my apologies. Go ahead, Zoom, good question.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I mean, I do remain optimistic, but I will say that I'm not so optimistic about legislative solutions. And I am more optimistic about personal behavior and personal solutions, and I see it in young people. And that's what makes me optimistic, because I really do see, as I have a teenager, that they are aware and that they recognize that they have, that this is their problem for their generation to solve, just as we've been working on, other problems from the past. And so I think they really do have this in mind. And I do think it's going to come from them making better personal choices. The legislative option, I will tell you, to me, it sounds like good for thee, but not for me. And I think that that's something that we in ethical culture often depend upon and miss, the idea that we can change hearts and minds, including our own. Thank you.
Excellent point. Great thing. I agree with it. I'm going to address it in a second. I'm going to take just one more, and I haven't forgotten about airplanes.
What about a local audience, like a town? What can a town do that's local that can make a big difference?
Excellent question. And the towns, I haven't forgotten you, but I like that question, so I'm going to jump to it. Towns, what are the reasons that I go around and talk is that we need to start, because the legislation is so difficult to pass, because of lobbyists and people who just can't see what's important or beyond their nose. This is a grassroots movement that has started around the world. I also want to point out that legislation in other countries, remember this is a global model also, other countries are leading the way. America has lost its lead on climate change. We do not lead, we are catching up. Europe and their green revolution, other countries individually, and towns, we can do it. You can look, you can push your town. There's a Sierra Club is running a campaign, 100% renewable. You sign up in your town, get certified that it's getting all its energy from 100% renewable sources. Aspen, Colorado, Burlington, Vermont are two towns already in this country that are declared 100%. Now, just to give you an idea, Aspen does get some of its power from fossil fuels. They're capturing methane from their landfills. But the methane, turning the methane into carbon dioxide, believe it or not, by burning it is actually better than just letting the methane go up. So it's still, and it's there, and it's going to be emitted. So that is included, that and wind and solar. By promoting solar, by promoting wind, there are many, many other new technologies that are coming into play. Those are ways that towns and municipalities and people can do things. By maybe having more farmers markets and bringing in those low meat, more plant-based. I want to address, I see the time's up, I want to just quickly address airplanes. Air traffic, while airplanes have virtually no pollution controls on them right now, and even by electrifying transportation here, if I quickly go into this graph, you'll see that we only hit 85% because we do not have the technology to electrify planes or ocean-going ships at the moment. My son happens to be a pilot for Delta Airlines, so we kind of, my son's a pilot, so he pollutes, and we sent my daughter to MIT to be an engineer to work on that. And she isn't working on that, but that's my fantasy, so I'll stick with it. But I follow the aviation industry a little bit, and I know that they are working on it. We already know that there is in production a two-seater electric airplane, all electric. So they're looking at hybrid engines for planes. They are looking to move to alternative fuels. So everyone is aware that this is a situation, and most of the businesses, it's people and it's businesses that are moving us ahead into this, hopefully, we are on the cusp. I'm going to close here. We're on the cusp of a sustainability revolution. We have to be, or the planet won't be fit for our grandchildren. And we are facing a lot of political pushback because we're asking people to change our ways. But the optimistic thing is humanity has done it already. I want you to think about this. My favorite books, I read Jane Austen. Anyone know Jane Austen? Pride and Prejudice? She wrote 5 books. I happen to read all 5 of her books every year. I just love them. They're better than a sitcom. Well, what do they talk about? That they spent the day going 30 miles, or oh my God, 50 miles took a trip of 2 days, right? And we go up, drop my daughter off in Boston, and back in a day. So we have gone from horse and buggy to train, to automobile, to airplane. We've already seen 4 different transportation technologies just in a couple generations. So we have to, and when's the last time, did your grandparents have phones? And now I can talk, we do talk, my one daughter, that MIT daughter, is actually doing an internship in Germany, and she is on this Zoom call. We talk to her several times a week, and who would have even thought of that? So we actually have the technology. We have the solutions to this problem. We just have to raise our awareness and put it into effect. Take your time, look at what society in general, it's not even climate change, what society does for 7.8 billion people, the resources that we use, particularly in our Western society. We need the planet, and we make a mark on the planet. There are copper mines. There's one in Utah that's 2.5 miles wide and 1/2 mile deep. But am I going to tell you to stop plugging in and stop using copper and electricity? I'm not going to tell you that. So we have to figure out a way to do this sustainably. And En-ROADS is a wonderful tool. And for those of you on Zoom, I can share this scenario with you right now. And for those of you here, I encourage you, so you can go in and you can, if you just cut and paste that, you can get to where we've left off. And I encourage you guys to play with this some more and learn, and click any triangle you see or any 3 dots that you see there, and you can get more information. And like I said, there are 90 different graphs. I hardly showed you any of them. So, you know, here's population exposed to sea level rise. So on that note, I want to thank you. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to talk some more.